There's conscious rebellion happening, and I love it.
Conscious rebellion.
Yeah, I love that about Massachusetts, but I think if we do that collectively, right, with other states, we can really kind of just make what we've always done happen, make history happen. And so I would say that the state is absolutely invested in a way that is rebellious.
Massachusetts recently tied with New York for being the safest state for LGBTQ plus equality. That's according to the Out Leadership's annual report. But in the times that we're in, does that make Massachusetts a target, Shaplaie?
Does it make Massachusetts a target? I think Massachusetts has been a target, right? Much like California, much like New York. I think what's different here is we just have a love for everyone, right? And I think what would make us even a bigger target is if we were to spread that love around and make it more inclusive. And so I love Massachusetts, right? I love the fact that we are inclusive. Ish, very much ish. But I think that we want to be a target, right? Because you want to be only lighthouses are targets, right? And so we want to be a target, for sure.
Framing.
Nice.
Okay.
You say inclusive-ish. I'm hearing you feel like there's more to do, that there's a bit more summit to achieve. And you're envisioning perfect Massachusetts. What is that looking like?
Ooh, perfect Massachusetts. I think perfect wouldn't be perfect for everyone, right? But I would say, and I sometimes say this ad nauseum, but like, centering the most marginalized person would make a perfect Massachusetts. So what does it look like for Black queer people? What does it look like for immigrants who are queer? What does it look like for people who are handicapped and queer? What did it, you know what I mean? What would it look like for deaf people who are queer? What does mindfulness look like for them in these spaces where we're all gathering, making sure that everybody can be a part of everything?
Will it be harder to make that a reality now, Adrianna?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be harder to make it a reality. And I think if we take on that it could be harder, it will be harder. I think there's such a power in our belief right now. And I feel like we're in a moment where we just need to remind ourselves of what we know.
Period.
And we need to move forward with that knowing.
And what do we know?
We know who we are. We know what we need. And we know that we can get what we need through being in community with each other. We can't be told about ourselves.
We also know what they're planning. Like you mentioned the word target, we know this is happening. So let's not wait until something happens to react to it. Let's start proactively putting together our plan in defense. I mean, around the country, we see all these anti-LGBTQ plus laws being pushed through the legislature. For every law, anti-LGBTQ plus law, I want to see 3 pro laws put out there. I mean, so much of what we're doing right now, and they gave us their plan a year and a half ago, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's something that comes up even when people talk about whether the Democrats were ready for all of this, right? The plan, it was there.
It was there, laid out. Page 77. There it is.
I mean, the blueprint was there from the start, though, wasn't it? This is just a repeat of history.
What we've seen in
we've seen this over and over and over again.
So, Jean, one form of defense is what you're doing with building the Boston's LGBTQ History Museum.
Yeah.
How are you worried about that effort being able to continue?
I am not worried about it. And I'm not worried because part of this work is going through the archives and reading and researching, and you're seeing people who did 10 times bigger. They achieved 10 times bigger initiative with no resources. And to think that I'm in a space where I'm surrounded by leaders who are committed to my safety and my success. Those 3 are on the table, and then also having a state that cares about seeing this work coming about. So I feel like the resources are there. They just need to be leveraged, and they need to be utilized in the best way possible. I think it puts us in a slower pace to getting that permanent space built or retrofitted into a fully permanent space, doors open and people coming in. But I'm not worried about it, nor do I feel like, oh, this sort of like is gonna take away. But there is a real sort of economic anxiety around it. Can investors invest in it? Will philanthropists come through if they feel like at a federal level with the signature of a pen, your institution could be dismantled, right? What happens if they take away 501c3 status, right? I reached out to our lawyers recently in fiscal compliance officer and asking, could we operate as a company? If we couldn't be a 501c3, could you just be a private company and do what we want? But then what does that mean for the folks who want to support this work financially? What does that mean for their donation and grants and all these things? So we're exploring what can we do in the face of these systemic attacks. But I think the work meant to inspire people and meant to engage them and do this work of visibility.
Shaplaie, is the state invested in this?
In the arts?
In the preservation of LGBTQ history?
I would say absolutely. I can just say for the Youth Commission, we have always been a partner with the LGBTQ Museum. I would say that the state is invested in making sure, this is what I will say about the state, there is conscious rebellion happening, and I love it.
Conscious rebellion.
Yeah, I love that about Massachusetts, but I think if we do that collectively, right, with other states, we can really kind of just make what we've always done happen, make history happen. And so I would say that the state is absolutely invested in a way that is rebellious.
Now, you mentioned youth. I know you work with youth, obviously, on the state's LGBTQ Youth Commission. At the same time, we know at the federal level, there are attacks on things such as gender-affirming care, for instance. So what happens if that starts to be undone at the federal level? It already is being. So how does Massachusetts protect its LGBTQ youth?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying, right? You see every day, for everything that you see this person do, you see an attorney file a lawsuit, right? That's one thing that I love about
being
our
proactive.
law. Exactly, being proactive for sure. But I think what we have to do is think about what we can withhold. Every single rebellion has started with a withholding of something, right? It doesn't have to be, the governor of California just mentioned, like, we would actually net $76 billion if we kept this from the government. And so what if Massachusetts, who actually would net about 46 million, right, kept it away? So like, let's think about that, and let's think about how we can be proactive about our rebellion instead of reacting to every single thing that's happening. That's just meant to keep us tired.
Yeah.
So we know one thing that's made Massachusetts a safe haven for LGBTQ people, even if it's not all of them, was that we legalized gay marriage in 2004. Do you think that back then that this panel would have been able to happen?
Happen where? Well, no, I mean,
Anywhere,
I think
yeah.
I can see us gathering. I could have seen us gathering.
I guess in the mainstream, to your point, yeah.
Yeah, I could have seen us gathering, but now, what do y'all think?
I think so. I think that we have, I mean, the CEO of our state is a queer woman. And so I think that those kinds of conversations will and can happen. And I'm a benefit of a Massachusetts marriage, and actually got married with my husband at the State House. I mean, at City Hall in Cambridge, where it happened. So 2019.
Okay.
So years afterwards. But I think what we have to do is come up with ideas for progressing our cause and our needs and our desire to be not only included, but to have the foundation to move forward in certain things. And that's where I think there's a lot of room for us to be creative. Discrimination is a very creative tool. I mean, if someone wants to keep some people out, many people will get into a room and come up with a bunch of ideas. And they'll push those ideas forward. So not only do we have to be creative enough to dismantle those ideas, but we have to have a whole nother bucket of ideas that advance us. And so that's the conversation I want to see happen.
Yeah.
I want to see rooms getting together going, all right, here are 10 ideas we can have to push in front of not only local legislators, but state legislators as well.
We need to be organized.
Do you think that the queer community here is on one accord, on the same page? I mean, we know, because we were talking about how there wasn't a pride parade. What was this, 2020, where we had the absence of the pride parade?
2020,
And so,
2021.
yes, and then you came back with Pride for the
2023.
People in 2023,
And
still
did the
here,
thing, did the thing.
still queer.
Right? Did the
Yes,
thing.
and,
That's right.
but do you feel like that division has been mended in that time?
The division.
The division where the former Boston Pride was being called out for not being
I think thank you. Yeah, I think
vocal
it's
about Black Lives Matter. Yeah.
right. I think it's I think we are moving differently. We're an organization that is centering the most marginalized. The most marginalized came to the table and gathered and organized and thought about how we're going to move forward. And so it's looking different, and will continue to as we continue to center the most marginalized and understand what we need and what we need to as communities to come together. And I say communities just because the LGBTQ plus communities are so broad, and we sit at so many different intersections, and so I always like to speak to that we are many and one.
You know, recently we gathered and we're trying to figure out.
I love that you say gathered.
We did. And to answer your question, yeah, I think this
John
panel
always gathers us.
This panel,
In many different ways.
right? I think this panel have existed. You know, we see history of it all the time, both publicly. You know, the Western Bay or the James Baldwin. These are like national figures, but even locally, as we go through archives, we see people were convening to advance a movement. So to me, we recently gathered and we're talking about if you work within LGBTQ and legislation and you work within culture and I work within the arts and history, we all have our own goals because we work in very specific sectors. But what is the collective? Right. How, if I need something legislatively, I need to know I can call you. If I'm doing this initiative, I want to make sure I check in with you. And I think for me and for you, the responsibility is getting a bit heavier because when Shaplaie is calling us out on talk, including folks who have disabilities, both visible and non-visible, making sure spaces are accessible. I'm like, oh,
It's a lot.
how do I get that done?
A lot of
So I think surrounded by that kind of expertise and honestly accountability allows us to do this work in a way it's gonna continue to be better because she's working with these youth and she's calling us out. Your
ripping up the
space
next
didn't have all
generation to
these
do that.
things.
Oh, there's so much to talk about. We do have to leave it there.
Yeah.
But this is not the last panel we'll have. And we'll have one in a month that's not June, too, right?
Good. Love that, yes.
Adrianna, Jean, Shaplaie, and Michael, thank you so very much, and happy Pride.
Thank
Thanks so much for having
Happy
us.
Pride to you.
You too. Happy Pride.